Thanks so much for coming. My name is Kyle Simpson, and it's going to be a little bit of a different sort of a talk for me. This is only the second time I've given this talk, and I have drastically rewritten it since the first time I gave it, and I'll get into that in just a moment about why. But we're going to talk about what I like to say, that browser versions are dead. A little bit of a tongue-in-cheek sort of phrase, because obviously software versioning has been around since the beginning of time. It's going to be around when our grandkids are learning this craft. But what I mean by this is sort of a mindset that we have in the web development industry, that I hope that mindset begins to die. The mindset that is an obsession about browser versions. So we're going to talk about that. I go by Getify online, Twitter, and everywhere else that it matters. So if you want to follow me, if you want to tell me that I'm completely wrong today, that's totally cool. Easy to find. A couple of self-serving things for just a moment. We're at an HTML conference. This is HTML5 Cookbook. Came out about a year ago. There are literally about 1,000 HTML5 books out there, and I fully realize that. If you happen to be that one guy who still doesn't have an HTML5 book and you want one, here's a discount code off of that from O'Reilly. I'm also launching, this should be launching on Monday, maybe even sooner, but I'm launching a Kickstarter for my next book project that I call the JS Perf Guide. Anybody familiar with jsperf.com? JavaScript performance testing. So I'm going to write a guide about how to write effective tests, how to use those tests to do automated regression testing, performance regression testing, things like that. So you can take a look at jsperfguide.com. Right now it's just a screenshot since it's still pending approval, but that should be launched soon, and hopefully we can get the word out about that. So help me out with that. Lastly, I have a variety of workshops that I'm teaching. I'm teaching one here in Austin in March. This is sort of an intro to JavaScript. So if you have been on the fringes of JavaScript, if you've been in CSS land for a while, or if you just want sort of a refresher, there's a workshop going there. I'll be teaching in other places too, so you can go and check out some of the workshop events that I'll be doing. So I mentioned a minute ago that I gave this talk before, and proof that when a speaker gives a talk and you give feedback to the speaker, that oftentimes they do listen unless they're entirely narcissistic. And I like to think that I'm not quite that far. I'm on that scale, but I'm not that far. So I actually do listen to the feedback and try to make things better. But one of the phrases that people used to describe in the feedback when I gave this talk the first time was literally the, quote, angry white man rant. So I've been using that since then to say that's not how I want to come across. But that may be how this comes across, even with my attempt to rewrite things, even with my attempt to try to make things a little bit more straightforward. So I've been trying to say a little bit less ranty, a little bit more inspirationally, whatever you want to use word there. That's my goal. My goal is to bash on this industry for a little while in this talk, tell us about all the things that we've been lying to ourselves and doing wrong for a long time, and then hopefully by the end, we've gotten rid of all of that stuff, and we can have this new renaissance of thought about this industry. And I'll say this, the reason why, if I look at it in this room right now, I know some of you, but there are many of you that I don't even know, but I know for a fact that the sum total of talent in this room and the sum total of talent at this conference is mind-blowing. It's staggering what we can produce as an industry. But what I feel like for a long period of time is that we have been held back by a series of lies and misconceptions about the industry, and we have not been achieving that full potential. What I'm interested in is not making you feel bad because that's your day-to-day job to make the button line up exactly right. I'm not trying to make you feel bad about that, but I'm trying to inspire you that there's so much more that you could be doing for this industry. And I'm excited to see where the industry will go when we let go of the chains of that old thinking. That's what this talk is really about. So pay attention, by the way, to this background picture. We've got a guy named Joe who's just coming onto the screen, but you'll see more about him as we go throughout the talk. So pay attention to Joe. Okay, so I mentioned that there was this obsession about browser versions. And again, browser versions being sort of a mindset about browser versions, not the actual version itself. I would sort of tongue-in-cheek say there's this browser diversity that we now have. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I first got into this industry, the concept of browser diversity was a ridiculous concept. Now we know it to be true fact. That is the way our industry works. Most of you are probably already have several versions of each browser installed, or you have virtual machines for all of these things. You probably just went and crashed the Microsoft download servers to get their virtual machines that they just released, because we are obsessed with the concept of testing every single possible browser version and operating system combination. And I have an account on BrowserStack. It's a great company, and it's neat if you need to log in and check something or test something. But we do have this obsession with testing things in every possible environment. And I'm going to suggest throughout the course of this talk that maybe that's not quite the most helpful mindset. I know that's a practical thing. That's sort of an unwritten requirement of our job description. But maybe it's not the most helpful mindset for pushing this industry forward. So I said browser diversity. This is actually even a slightly more complex screenshot of browser diversity. This is a timeline, and it's only a small piece of a giant image that I couldn't even possibly fit on a slide. But you can go and Google search for this. But these little dots, these are all versions of different browsers out there. And like I said, this is a small piece of a much bigger, but you can see the ridiculousness of how many different browser versions. This yellow line here, I think that yellow line might be Firefox, and then the bottom line there is Chrome. You see how ridiculous the concept of browser version and tracking what browser versions are out there has become, even as you go from the left to the right of this timeline. And so we have this idea, well, I only support the major browsers because my Google Analytics tells me that that's the most people that come to my site. But if you actually were paying attention to browser version support, you'd have to be digesting things like this. And I would suggest to you that's crazy town. That's not practical. That's not reality. So you're already making very subjective decisions about this concept of browser support. And I'm just going to try to push the envelope a little bit. So it's really a raging, hellish nightmare if you try to chase down that rabbit hole. This industry has set us up for a fair amount of failure in that respect, because the ball is always moving. Even if you got really, really good at it, tomorrow Chrome is going to release a new version, and you're going to have to incorporate something new into your process. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It is a good thing. There's Joe again. Looks like he's on a bike. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but there are a set of lies that I think our industry has developed for ourselves. They're lies that have been told to us and lies that we have told ourselves and accepted. This quote from Mark Twain, or he made famous this quote, lies, damn lies, and statistics. But it encompasses this idea that there is a set of cult wisdom that we all believe about the way the industry works, but is that actually true? So number one, a lie, something I would call a lie, is that browser versions still matter. Now, they might have mattered earlier in my career. I'm not going to go back and say in those early days where you're trying to deal between IE4 and IE5 and Netscape 4 and things like that. I'm not going to try to go back and make lots of subjective judgments about 10 years ago, but I would say now that we have arrived to a point where I think this is a lie, that the browser version still matters. The truth is that a browser version is just an arbitrary marketing label. I worked for Firefox for a while, and I saw firsthand, not that this is authoritative experience for all browsers, but I saw firsthand that it was basically just a marketing label around an arbitrary set of functionality that we happened to get in by a time deadline. It had absolutely nothing to do with what users could expect out of the browser. And in fact, there were a number of things that would change about that marketing label as it moved from nightly into Aurora, into beta stage, and into production stage. So this label is what we use as sort of a proxy for determining what sets of behavior are happening in that browser. But the truth is, that features are what matters. Now, every other programming discipline on the planet has known since their inception almost. If you ever look at a piece of software that's compiling on Linux, you know this. They feature test for everything. They feature test for libraries that they might use in a future version that they don't even use yet. But for some reason, this is sort of a new concept for our industry, to embrace fully and completely the idea that feature tests are how we live and die. If you're not feature testing something, it's going to break. Plain and simple, it's going to break. Somehow, some way. But we haven't yet fully embraced feature testing, but I think the truth is that the browser version isn't what matters, it's the features that matter. And there is a great set of functionality for feature testing. It's not complete yet. We need to continue to push on the browser vendors to give us better and more reliable, more robust feature testing. But there's a lot that's already there. And there's a lot that's not being used, a lot of assumptions that get made. I support IE6, therefore that means I support the following sets of features, until we say, well, but ignore the fact that there's literally half a dozen different security settings that can change the way IE6 works, and there's antivirus programs that can change the way IE6 works, and there's proxies in between and routers that can change the way IE6 works. But ignore all of that. I support IE6. It's a dangerous assumption, I think. So some of the things that tell us these lies, or some of the sources of where we've gotten these lies from, are analytics. Analytics are extremely powerful. I'm not bashing on analytics and saying, get rid of these on your site. But when you live and die by analytics, when you drive all of your decision-making about your technology based upon analytics, you can really kind of get this tunnel mindset that forgets this bigger picture of where the industry is moving. Again, I hope that's kind of what this talk does, is sort of remove some of those blinders and help you see a little bit more broadly. Bloggers. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of blogs out there that talk about this topic, and they reinforce this topic. And if you are even somewhat newish to this industry, I'll call myself old in the industry since I've been here for 12 years. If you're somewhat newish, if you've been in this industry less than, let's just pick arbitrarily, 5 years, you probably never knew anything but this is the way the world works. We test in every single browser, and we bash on IE because they're the bad guys in the industry. They're the ones that always make this so much harder. You probably have never heard anything other than that from most bloggers. Also, your marketing departments. Surprisingly, they're the ones that push this lie a lot. If you have worked at a company, and if you've paid attention to how your marketing departments at many companies deal with this whole topic, they sort of go with the flow. They don't really know what they're doing, but they go with the flow of what bloggers say and what the loosey feelings of the industry are, and they propagate this lie, and they sell your software based upon a lie. And what happens is now that becomes a requirement of your software that you must build based upon a lie that a marketing department came up with. Another lie. This site has to look, feel, and behave exactly the same in all browsers and versions. This is a huge one. This is a huge one, and it's so difficult to fight back against this lie. Especially if you've ever done any sort of design work and you have sort of that perfectionistic, I am going to stay up until 3 in the morning figuring out why there's 1 pixel extra margin on IE7. If you have that mentality, or if you've ever had that mentality, you understand why this is such a difficult statement to accept as a lie. But again, drawing somewhat on my experience working at a browser vendor, the browser vendors don't want the browsers to be the same. The truth is that browsers are different on purpose. They explore features in different ways. There's different properties. There's vendor prefixing. Oh my goodness, that's a whole talk in and of itself. But they explore features from different ways, and some will implement a feature this way, and some will implement it very differently. And until that thing has shooken itself out in the real world, you have 2 choices: avoid it entirely, or navigate this very difficult, sometimes, industry of it's very different in Chrome than it is in Firefox. WebSockets is a great example. WebSockets was in Firefox, and then it wasn't in Firefox, and then it was in Firefox again, but different. Literally, they had major release versions of Firefox that went in that pattern. Whereas Chrome just iterated on the protocol and put in different security implementations. Firefox literally ripped it out for an entire major version. It's tough. I understand. I'm not sitting in an ivory tower. I've been 12 years in your shoes, working for clients, working for companies. In fact, I just started a recent contract where I work for a large electronic e-retailer. They have a large e-commerce presence on the web. They have all the same constraints and problems that you have. When I showed up day one, I said exactly to them what I'm saying to you. You have to start fighting these battles with your clients and with your customers and with your bosses. So your bosses are one. They definitely will tell you this lie that says, well, there's some product requirement that says it must look and feel exactly the same in IE6 regardless. I had a job once that I had a boss that told me that it was sort of strange. We wanted to put in, the design called for rounded corners. And we had to support both Chrome and IE, not Firefox, but both Chrome and IE, of course, 6 and above. And Chrome very nicely had rounded corners in CSS, so did IE, like 9 or whatever. But we didn't obviously have it in IE6, and we said, well, of course, our choices are to have no rounded corners at all, but the designers want rounded corners. Or we can have rounded corners only in Chrome and not in older IEs. Or we can do this sort of polyfill hacking thing where we put images for rounded corners in on the older browsers. Now, most of you choose that path on a daily basis. Most of you do those sorts of things. You put in these polyfills and hacks to bring newer features back into the older browsers. And I'm not bashing on you, but I think that's an unhealthy direction for our web to be facing. We're driving by looking in the rearview mirror. But my boss did a strange thing. He actually said, you can't do rounded corners at all. He completely pushed back on the designers and said, no rounded corners because we can't do it with CSS yet. It's an admirable stand, I guess, to take, but they missed out on the benefit of rounded corners, the aesthetic benefit. If we're not functional, but aesthetic benefit missed out. I'm not sure if that was a healthy thing. Maybe the healthy thing would have been say, it's okay for Chrome to have rounded corners and IE6 not to have rounded corners. I don't think they would have lost a single customer if that was true. But they had a very irresponsible mindset from the marketing department to the sales department, all the way down, filtered down into the development, that said the customer expects it to look exactly the same in all browsers. Therefore, it's a product requirement. Clients, of course, say this. So those of you that are independent, clients will tell you my e-commerce page has to look exactly the same. Yes, I do want you to spend lots of extra time figuring out why there's a double margin in IE6. I do want you to absolutely obsess about every single pixel. Clients are famous for this. You show them a screenshot that looks great in Chrome, and they say, great, when is it going to look like that in IE6? And you say, the next of never. And as I said, sales departments. They go out and they sell your software, and they put a little line on their sales marketing brochure that says, works great in IE6 and above. And the lie is propagated. Just making a cool jump now. Yes, this is actually what I have done. I've given you the very slowest frame rate animated GIF that has ever been produced as the background images. Those little 6-second Twitter Vine videos, they got nothing on this. Here's another lie, that every user matters. That's a painful one to accept for some of you. Some of you would call that sort of gold. The customer's always right, the user always matters. The truth is they don't. They don't all matter the same. Some don't matter at all to you. Here's my proof. There are still users using Netscape 4.7. As recently as a couple of years ago, I had to work on a major airline website that had a requirement to work in Netscape 4.7. Because for them, they got 200,000 visits a month from Netscape 4.7 users. That was a lot of revenue that they were not willing to give up. But how many of you actively test in Netscape 4.7? I'm willing to bet not many hands go up. Those users don't matter to you. You're already making these subjective decisions, so accept that it is a lie that all users matter. You make these decisions, and they're tough calls. I'm not saying that this is an easy thing. This is a process, a step-by-step process. It's coming to terms with the fact that we've been lied to for a while. The truth is that user importance is complicated. You might say, we have 3% of users still on IE6, and we make $200,000 a month in revenue on our e-commerce website. Therefore, we have a requirement that we still functionally support IE6. Now, that might be the underlying requirement. The spirit of the requirement is that they be able to complete their transaction. When it comes to your desk and a development task for you, what that gets translated to, because of these other lies and these other assumptions, is make it look and feel and work exactly the same for those IE6 users. Because if it's even remotely different for them, we might lose a sale. And I've got news for you. The people that are still using IE6, the poor souls still on IE6, they already have a really crappy web experience. Think of all the major properties that just in the last year or so have completely abandoned IE6 support. Not just it doesn't look quite right. They've completely abandoned support for IE6. They don't even test in it. It's probably completely broken for them. All the Google properties, including YouTube, Facebook, all those other sites that most of those users probably care about a lot more than your e-commerce website. All those are completely broken for them in IE6. Day after day, they toil through the pain and the nightmare that is using IE6. Do you think when they show up at your website and your purchase button is 4 pixels to the right, are they going to say, oh my God, I cannot shop here, I will not buy the product, I'm going to Target instead? No, they're not going to say that. That's not how it works. You've got to shed some light on this process, all these assumptions and lies that keep being fed to you. So there's lots of excuses. We'll run through these quickly. One excuse, of course, everybody knows. Let's say it together. IE sucks. You didn't say it with me. Let's try it again. IE sucks. Let's blame the browser, right? This is a famous one. Many of you know Douglas Crockford. He stands up at conferences with a giant screen that says, IE6 must die. Actually, he's got another one. The past is the enemy of the future. That's another one of his famous quotes that he puts on slides. We're blaming the browser, blaming those old browsers for these lies. Somehow, magically, mysteriously, if we get rid of IE6, all our pains are going to be gone. Until we realize the truth is we're going to be stuck on IE7, and then IE8, and then IE9, and then, heaven forbid, IE10, which is more platform locked than any other browser that Microsoft has ever released. What does that spell for the future? It's not good. A warning, this next slide is offensive. I tried to blur out the most offensive words on this slide, but just as a warning, if you have delicate sensitivities, glance away for a moment. I tried to blur out the most offensive words so you don't have to see. I apologize. Just couldn't pass it up. This is a great little script, I suppose. If you want to put up one of those annoying banners on your site that says, this website is too good to be viewed on your browser. We're blaming the browser, and in fact, in just a moment, we'll see we start to blame the user too. Old browsers are holding back the web. It's a great article that came out on Smashing Mag, sort of proclaimed that to the world. So now that's the truth. It's the old browser's fault. The fact that IE6 exists still, the fact that somehow Microsoft didn't have a secret kill switch on IE6, that's what's holding back our industry. That phrase right there, that was probably angry white man. Sorry about that. It's not just limited to IE, though. This happens with Chrome. This very famously happens with Chrome. It's even happened with Firefox, although Firefox is really good that when one of their developers releases something that only works in Firefox, about 2.3 seconds later, some Chrome developer complains, and about 3.6 seconds later, some Firefox developer fixes it. Chrome developers not quite so quick to fix always, but we're getting some of this proprietary works best in behavior, even in the most modern of browsers. That's my proof. If there's nothing else you take away from the talk, that's my proof that this lie continues to propagate itself. We have not solved the problem because we've somehow magically educated everybody that IE sucks, that IE6 sucks. Take a deep breath. There are people that have some sanity in this world. This is a great blog post. If you haven't read Nicholas Zakis, SlickNet on Twitter, I follow everything that he writes. He's a great guy, very smart and intelligent. He wrote a very well-reasoned blog post about, hey, maybe it's time to take a little step back and not do quite so much bashing of IE. If you can stomach it for just a few minutes, I would recommend you read that blog post. This jump is not looking as good for Joe. Another excuse, users suck. What I mean by this is we start to figure out a bunch of different ways to blame and annoy and penalize the users because of the browser that they happen to be using. Bunch of examples of that real quick. The Internet Explorer 7 tax. This didn't actually happen, but a site came out and said that they were going to charge an extra tax to users buying products on their site if they visited it in IE7. And we get a chuckle out of that, but I submit to you that there's that underlying thread of a misconception and a lie. I'm not sure that's helping our industry. Makes us feel good about ourselves. Doesn't make grandma feel good, and she's the one we're building the web for. We're not building the web for us. Building the web for your grandma and my grandma. They just want to experience something good. They don't care about all these details. They definitely don't want a pop-up that comes up and starts blaming them. Somehow, magically, mysteriously, they're at fault. It's ridiculous. That's narcissism for a web author to say, I am God. I get to decide how you experience the web. What happened to user choice? Another example, somewhat less offensive, but still it's putting in the face. You chose the wrong browser. Choose any other browser besides the one that you've chosen to use. Go away. We don't like your kind here. In any other part of society, this would be ridiculous. It would be called out as absolutely unacceptable. And yet, we make ourselves feel good about it in this industry. Did you know that Internet Explorer is out of date? No, I had no idea. Thank you for educating me. This is the very first time that anybody has ever told me that my Internet Explorer is a problem. There was actually an education campaign that said, just do an automatic redirect from your site. If somebody comes to it in an old IE, automatically redirect them to this site, which says, how did I get here? Browser upgrade campaign. If my grandma showed up at this site, do you think she has even the foggiest clue what to do with that information? Is this what passes for user education? I submit not. It educates developers. It's really good at educating us, but that's preaching to the choir. This isn't good for the open web, I don't think. This is an interesting quote. We're actually going to come back to this, so remember this quote, because it was sort of a snide comment. It says, a user reports that our new responsive HTML5-based Flash-free website does not work in Internet Explorer 7. Nobody cares. That was a snide remark to say, F off all you IE7 users, I don't care. We're going to come back to that quote, because he might have gotten it right for the wrong reason. This is really looking bad for Joe. This is not going to end well. That's my trick for getting you to stay to the end of the talk, so you can see the payoff slide. Finally, another excuse. It just takes so much time and effort to make IE6 work. I hear this a lot from people, and I've been in the trenches too. I hear this a lot from people that say, it's just so hard to make IE6 work. I spend 70% of my development time on that, 30% doing it correctly for all the other browsers, and 70 or 80% of my time, even more than 100% of my time somehow, doing it for IE6. There's a whole host of examples of how we handle how hard it is to work in IE6. That's the first time I've ever got to use a rage face in a talk, so I was proud of that. I missed that whole meme, by the way. So, but we do these crazy CSS tricks to target different versions of IE based upon bugs in their CSS parser. That's one example. Anybody ever written CSS like that on a site? Come on, more of you did it than that. Don't even pretend. Or this, it's hard to see in this lighting, but the conditional comment. Have an entirely separate style sheet just for that one browser version. Serve up a whole new style sheet just for those guys. I've seen people that advocate serving up a style sheet that does nothing but turn the font to Comic Sans and text decoration to Blink. Or this is actually some code I sort of stole from some of my own libraries. We do it in JavaScript too. JavaScript's not immune. We do all kinds of crazy feature inferencing and feature detection and the dreaded user agent parsing and things like that, just so that we can fork the behavior of a site so it behaves differently. You'll notice that we've got a whole bunch of different examples of how people get around what they should have been doing all along, which was feature testing, like I said earlier. You rarely see feature testing. Now, those of you that use Modernizer and you've embraced that, congratulations. But those of you that aren't doing those sorts of things yet, is it possible that stuff like this is what's holding the web back? Not IE6, but you doing stuff like this maybe is holding the web back. Just some food for thought. Oh, this is my favorite. This is taken out of sort of bastardized version from jQuery, but it's the Internet Explorer DOM-ready hack where they do a do scroll listener, because in Internet Explorer, before it had DOM-ready events, it would fire the do scroll event once the document was ready. So we listen, we pull for that do scroll event to have fired, and then we know the document ready has happened. It's ridiculous. Transparent pings in IE6. Anybody have that pain point from, maybe you've forgotten it because you did away with that nightmare, but we had for a long time. So, oh my gosh, what I can't possibly design because I can't do transparent pings in IE6. The truth was all along we could have done those 8-bit pings, even though Photoshop didn't support them. We could do those 8-bit pings, and it never would have been a problem for IE6, but we didn't like to do graceful degradation back then. We just liked to complain about it. Well, what about all the cool features that I want to put into my browser, and it's too hard to do those in the old ones? Like rounded corners, for instance. What do I do with rounded corners? It's so hard to put those in IE6. Here's a clue. Don't make it show up in IE6. Tell your designer to go take a smoke break or something if he's so up in arms about the fact that you removed the rounded corners from IE6. I mean, is it really going to stop somebody from experiencing your site to the fullest? I don't think so. There are very few sites. Maybe if you have a design site that's specifically about rounded corners, your IE6 users might not like that. Otherwise, I think you're in the clear. What about drop-down menus? This is a hated, bastardized thing in this industry. We've done so much stuff. How many of you ever did that crazy iframe, hidden iframe behind the menu hack so it could cover up Flash movies and other select boxes and things like that? You know what I'm talking about. Why are we so obsessed with drop-down menus on the web that we do that kind of crap? Why? I don't even like drop-down menus that much. Here's an option. Just don't do a drop-down menu for IE6 users. Whenever they click on one of the menu items, you take them to a page that has the full menu completely exposed all on one page. Bam, that took like 3 minutes. Now, I know it's much, much harder to convince your bosses, your clients, that that's okay. But that's part of what this talk is about, is broadening your horizon. Oh, what about file uploading, another evil of the web? We go to so much trouble to use file, and I could have done video here, but I just chose file uploading. It's a little bit more interesting. But we go to so much trouble to get around the fact that in IE you couldn't stylize the select button for a file upload. I mean, have any of you ever done those crazy hacks where it's like margin negative 9900 pixels and positioning transparent flash buttons over the top of your elements and ridiculousness like that? Is that what passes for web development craft? That's a sad state of affairs. That's what we spend our time on. Instead of doing awesome stuff for the web, we're doing that. Why not just let the button look bad in IE6? What's so bad about that? Now, again, I understand that if I were to give this talk 10 years ago, people would boo me out of the room. This is a timeful talk. This is a period talk because I believe we've arrived at the point where it's okay for us to start thinking like this. I think it's time for the industry to start thinking like this. I think it's okay. But I understand there was a purpose for these things at an earlier time. So I say learn your craft and get over it. And help others to get over it when it doesn't work. If you're spending more than like 1% of your time doing a few little simple workarounds like putting a dynamically generated page of your menu items, if that takes you more than a few extra minutes, you're doing it wrong. Learn your craft better or hire somebody else. It's not that hard. Web technology isn't ready. The W3C famously came out and said HTML5 is not ready. It won't be ready for 10 years. Stay away from the technology. It's terrible. And then recently, Mark Zuckerberg came out and said HTML5 is not ready. Facebook failed at it. And then the awesome guys over at Sencha went back and completely rebuilt the Facebook app on their own using HTML5 technology as a huge in-your-face. Yes, it can be done correctly. The technology is not the problem. Yeah, he definitely face-planted, much like those statements. I don't know why I keep hitting that weird button. So if we're out of excuses, let's just fix it. This is the hard part, but I'll spend the last few minutes of the talk saying, let's just fix it. Remember that quote I said, a user reports that our new responsive HTML5-based flash-free website does not work in Internet Explorer 7. Nobody cares. Yeah, We don't care anymore. How about you not caring? Now, here's where I need to say, there is a difference between saying, I support IE7, that it functionally works, or that I don't actively try to break it for IE7 by using one of those banners, or IE6 or whatever. There's a difference between that and having it a tier 1 premium grade A browser that you spend all of your time testing in. I think it's okay if there are some bugs in older browsers. If you don't spend all of your time testing your site to be completely bug-free in IE6, I'm going to sleep okay at night. Hope maybe you can too. You see, there's this idea and this lie, again, that says if we say that we support it, that means we have to fully test it. It has to be completely bug-free. It has to have the same sort of support. Now, Yahoo came out with that whole idea of graded browser support, but we need to fully embrace that concept. Allow stuff to start breaking as it goes back in older browsers. It happens everywhere else in software. Why are we the only industry that can't allow that to happen? So let's embrace browser differences. They are a fact. They're a reality of our industry. We should embrace them. We should take advantage of them. We should do as much as we possibly can to exploit them to do awesome stuff for the web. That's what's going to excite people and get more people into our industry. That's going to provide more awesome, exciting, engaging experiences for grandma. It's only if we embrace those differences instead of living 10 years in the rearview mirror. Let's use feature detection. Duh. If you're not using feature detection in your site or application, after this talk is done, it's lunch. Don't go get lunch. Go fix a line of code. Put a feature detect into your code. That's my homework assignment for you. Go put a feature detect in if you don't already have one. How about this mentality of instead of this whole let's tell everybody that their browser sucks and that this site is too good for their browser or something like that. How about if we just state very simply that this site supports the following things, and we let users know that their browser doesn't support the following 3 things, and so they're not going to have that feature. Maybe their browser doesn't support whatever is necessary for you to do file uploads, but they can still experience a whole lot of the rest of your site. They just don't get file uploads. User choice. It's not up to us to decide how they see it. Now I'm going to open up another sacred cow here for a moment. Spaces versus tabs. One of the arguments, not the only, but one of the arguments that people use for saying I need to format my code with spaces is because they say, I need to make sure that when you, Kyle, open up my code in your editor, that it looks exactly the way I intended it to look. What the hell? Why do you care what it looks like when I open it in my editor? And the same goes for why do you care how it looks for a user when they open it in their browser of choice? If it's functional, if it gives them what they want, maybe they choose to turn off CSS or images or JavaScript, but if they can still get done what they want to get done, that's their choice. Now, sometimes it's not their choice. Sometimes that choice was made for them by the IT department, but it's still the choice of them, not you. How about this OL degradation? If there's some bugs or if something just happens to not show up or if we turn off a feature because the feature detect doesn't pass, it just doesn't work. It's not going to be the end of the world. If there's a really critical code path feature that absolutely you can't get any clients if you don't have a polyfill, that's okay, go ahead and do that. But most of you don't have those features like that. Most of you are spending that work on non-critical stuff. Regressive fallbacks. You can have a really awesome drag and drop, touch-enabled uploading experience for the modern browsers and a crappy file upload button for everybody else. That's okay. That's really okay. Progressive enhancement. I don't even need to tell you this because you already know about progressive enhancement, but fully embrace that. And lastly, there's been a lot of talks at every kind of conference, including this one, about this buzzword, responsive design. Responsive design is all about sort of the CSS side of it. I would say reactive design is a bigger umbrella that says, let's have our sites and our applications react to the environment that they run in. React sanely and responsibly to the environment they run in. That's not just about the visuals, that's also about the functionality. So retrain your bosses. You're going to have some difficult conversations with your bosses. You're going to have to tell them that the total cost of ownership of the way that you're suggesting things will be lower. It may suck to have those conversations now, but the software will be higher quality, you'll get more customers, and it'll cost less. When you talk like that to a boss, he starts to listen a little bit better. You do have to retrain clients. The customer is not always right. The problem is that they think they own this industry. We own the industry. We're doing it for them, but we own the industry. It's our job to just say how it works. Here's how it works, client. Here's what I can give you. Here's what I can't give you. Here's what I won't give you. Here's what's irresponsible to give you. If you had a customer that demanded that you transmit credit cards over an insecure email channel, which I had one that tried to convince me that I must do that, you would push back on them and say that's irresponsible, it's insecure, it's unfair. It's not how we're going to treat users. Maybe it's okay to say the same thing about some of the stuff that they've been pushing you around for a while. And you're going to have to retrain the marketing and sales departments too. Now, the truth is that wars are not won by the big battles, they're won by the small skirmishes. And you're not going to win this war tomorrow or Monday. It's going to take a lot of little skirmishes. But I promise you this, if you never fight that battle, if you never push back, if you never ask, are you positive that the pixel perfection is so important? If you never ask those tough questions, if you never push back, it will never change. Ever. We're going to be fighting this battle with Chrome 35 and IE 14, something. It's an open web platform, and I say that browser diversity is a good thing. It's time for us to embrace that. It's time for us to see what we can really produce when we're not held back by all those lies. Only one biker was harmed in the making of these slides. Thank you guys so much. I will be in the open space and around lunch. I appreciate it very much.